If it takes you longer than an hour to fall asleep initially at the beginning of your night because your mind is overactive, racing, or you simply just feel too awake to fall asleep, and this happens at least 3 out of 7 days every week for the last 3 months, then this video is for you. We're going to be talking about long-term sleep onset insomnia in relation to being more of a thinker type person. And what that simply means is that you're not able to fall asleep in an easy way, and that's what's creating the problem. Now, in my sleep coaching practice, I actually define this in a more practical way because my work with clients is all about making sure that they know how to not only overcome their sleep problems and insomnia struggles, but also how to future proof their sleep for many years to come. So I look at your ability to be able to fall asleep in 15-20 minutes and knowing how to do that no matter what happens. So we don't want to have a couple of nights when you struggle and then more nights when you don't struggle. We want to put the right things in place so that you know what it takes to be able to fall asleep in 20 minutes in a very, very practical way. So that's really how it really helps us to understand if we put the tools and techniques in place, does it lead to us seeing these patterns change in a very, very practical way. So when it comes to being more of a thinker type person, this video series is very much focused on different ways that I work with clients who are that type. So if you haven't seen the previous video on this topic, I really would encourage you to start there because we laid the foundation of what it means to be more of a thinker type person and how your sleep struggles might show up in a different way. But more importantly, we also started with an exercise that will lay the foundation for the rest of the pieces that we're going to work on. So if you haven't seen that video, go ahead, look at that video, do the exercise so you can bring all those different answers into this video as well, so you can really build from there. If you've already seen that, then go ahead. We will jump into what we're doing next in relation to being able to fall asleep in an easier way and developing the skills to really help your mind know what that means as well. So the first thing we want to really understand, and that's always the foundation I look at with clients as well, is once you climb into bed and you're not able to fall asleep for an hour or so, what shows up for you? Different people have different situations, and really, it's really not the best to ignore what's showing up for you because it's going to help us know what we got to put in place that actually is going to work with that situation you're seeing. Now, this exercise, please don't do it in bed. There is no point keeping a notepad by the bedside or really making a note of as things are happening, because what you're doing is you're telling the mind to be further awake for a longer period of time. This exercise I always do in reflection to the nighttime the next morning. But again, not first thing. So none of these things should be done in the bedroom because what you're going to drive is more overanalyzing in that space. So I normally say to my clients after 30-45 minutes of getting out of bed, you want to sit down and reflect on what you have seen the night before. And again, one of the reasons we want to do that is every single night is going to be slightly different. So maybe some of the nights you have fallen asleep in an easier way, maybe because it was sheer exhaustion that has led up to that better. Maybe that you had a better day during the day and that's what led to a better outcome. Again, I don't know your situation, but you want to look at how it changes. It's never exactly one version. So you would reflect back and you would want to take a note of what you have noticed in the mind's behavior. So this is not other things. And I'll give you a couple examples of what you might actually see. So once you climbed into bed, one of the first things that usually happens is this what's next type strategizing. So when you have had problems falling asleep, historically, usually one of the first things that happens is what can I do in order to fall asleep in an easy way? So if you're not able to fall asleep very quickly, you're going to start doing different things. That's what I mean by what's next type behaviors. You might actually talk to yourself in a positive way. You might actually tell your mind to let go of things. You might actually maybe do a breathing exercise. maybe you put a meditation on. So again, these are some of those things that are already showing us where you go to as a behavior, as a mental behavior. If you put a meditation or something to listen to, you're doing that most likely because you want to distract your mind. And again, this is where we go back to the exercise I talked about in the previous video. Distraction type techniques or falling asleep in an easy way out of exhaustion is not the examples we want to build on, because that means that you're always going to have those things in order to be able to fall asleep. So you might put effort in first before you're able to fall asleep. That's a very typical example in this what's next type behavior or strategizing behavior. So make a note of those things that your mind is doing, what kind of behaviors those are, what maybe the self-talk is. So I'm doing this in order to fall asleep quickly, or I'm doing this in order to something. So you're going to hear that, you're going to see that, and you want to make a note of those things, because we then be able to really look at what is going to help with that situation. Another type of behavior that I see is that your mind is not highly active, but is just occupying the space. This is again what I mentioned in the other video about this bubbling up of thoughts. So if your mind is just simply bubbling up sort of different thoughts, what that means is that it's doing its best to decompress and file away different things that are either relevant or not so relevant anymore. So that little bubbling up of thoughts is usually what that activity is this decompressing, filing away, concluding things so that you can actually further decrease the mental activity. See, those two behaviors are very different. Often the what's next type behavior is fueled by frustration as well. So we've got an emotional component. Whereas the bubbling up of thoughts, often it can actually mean that you think you're relaxed, but your mind is still filling the space. So these are just two different type of behaviors. If you're not sure how your behaviors fit into this picture, then again, I'm hosting a live online session where we can really look at different situations and how these show up for different people. So you can come along, register for that, submit your questions so I really know how we can conduct that session and make sure we focus on the things that are going to be useful for those people who turn up to the live session. So the registration link is below, and go ahead and join us on the 10th of March. Now, let's go back to these two types of things. So if you're seeing, let's say, the what's next type behaviors, what that means is by the time you climbed into bed, your mind has not been able to create physical, emotional, and mental relaxation in order to transition into sleep in an easier way. And also there is doubt, uncertainty as an emotion as part of that. So if you're climbing into bed thinking, I'm not really sure how tonight is going to be like, you're more likely to put more effort in making it happen and doing what it takes to fall asleep. What I see in these kind of situations is what you end up doing prior to climbing into bed is almost a very fine-tuned or perfectionistic or very rigid type evening routine as well. So you're doing all these different things in order to make sure that you're able to fall asleep, but once you climb into bed, it's still not happening. Again, this is just one situation. What that means is that the what's next behavior has started actually way before you actually climbed into bed. It just simply continues. So what I want you to look at in that situation is really honestly looking at what you're doing, let's say half an hour, 45 minutes before climbing into bed, and untangling how you're looking at really separating from the daytime. If you're doing more and more things in order to fall asleep and secure that, that is not what I would call decrease of activity. That's actually more activity, because you want to make sure that you're doing the right things in the right order, the right length, in order to be able to fall asleep. So often that creates a lot of tension as part of that rigid routine. The other things that often happens for thinker types as they lead up to bed, and we're looking at this sort of evening routine type things, they mismatch. So they might be very physically driven. So temperature, a good mattress, decluttering their space, or maybe having a shower. Those are all very physically driven things. So that's a very typical sleep hygiene type uh, process. But it's not tailoring for how your mind is decreasing the activity. If you just do physical thing, it's mismatched to working with your mind. It's really that simple. So look at what's happening before you climb into bed, because if your mind is still doing the what's next type thing, you got to take some of these examples you have gathered through the exercise in the previous video, the non-active type relaxation, mental relaxation, and you want to be able to use the time before climbing into bed to fit them in. But this is not about doing more. It's actually often doing less and doing more specifically things that tailor for what's happening with you at the time. So let's say if you had a really lovely weekend day and your mind is not filled with lots of information, you're going to have a different process there than if it maybe is a work day and you've been working with your mind 6 or 12 hours of the day and you've really been doing a lot of different things, right? Those 2 days are very different. So look at how it relates to what's showing up for you. And I would say really look at untangling what pieces are working and what pieces are not really applicable to the challenge you're experiencing. If you end up in bed and your mind is still active, what that means is the previous 20-30 minutes has not created mental calmness as part of that process. That's why you're seeing that hour length of not being able to fall asleep. If we take the other example, which is this bubbling up of thoughts, and I already mentioned this, so that's more of this decompression type sort of filing away. What that means is your mind has affiliated lying down, maybe even darkness, and being comfortable in bed with that particular activity. So, what you want to do is you want to move that and you want to create time. Again, not straight before bed because that's often too late, but somewhere in your evening to sit down and really allow the mind to do that same activity. But a word of warning, we're not looking for emptiness of the mind. We're not looking for the absence of thought. We're looking for a conclusion to the day. So, how is your mind separating from the daytime as you're heading into your nighttime? So, both of these scenarios are actually very typically the opposite. So, if you're climbing into bed and your mind has not separated the daytime behaviors from the action of climbing into bed, it's just going to continue doing the same because he doesn't know what the difference is. So, what I want you to think about is to create a different setting or set of behaviors for your mind. Daytime, very different. Your active mind is very useful during those hours, but in the nighttime, the activity has to come down in order to be able to not only fall asleep in an effective way under 20 minutes, but also having a great quality sleep across your nighttime. But your mind might not know the difference. Climbing into bed does not mean that your mind understands what you're asking from it. And if you keep giving it more things to do in that hour of not being able to fall asleep, very simply what I see is your mind just now has understood that it requires to take an hour of action in order to fall asleep. And so that's just the behavior. What we got to take out is that middle bit. You can fall asleep, even though it takes you an hour to do that, but there's lots of activity in between climbing into bed and being able to achieve that. So, really look at some of these different scenarios, look at what's happening for you, and then look for appropriate tools and techniques. But most of those will not be quick things. And this is that word of warning. A lot of the times, thinker types almost also become very impatient. I've got to figure it out now. I got to make sure I find the perfect or the right tools and techniques. Now, that's of course possible. And I've seen that not just with myself overcoming insomnia, but also so many clients overcoming their insomnia. But it has to be based on relaxation, kindness, compassion, and patience and commitment to not switching tools and techniques, but to really doing the work so you know what's applicable to the situation, and then really practicing the tools and the techniques that can build a new behavior. So it's retraining your mind so that it can create physical, emotional, mental relaxation together with your body. They're not separate pieces. If your mind is active, it's going to transfer into physical tension, fidgetiness, tossing and turning. If your mind is active, it's going to eventually turn into some sort of emotional tension as well, frustration, disappointment, all those kind of emotions that you can feel when you're really struggling to fall asleep. So the three are working together, and we got to really look at what to put in place so that your mind is not working against you. So like I said before, we are continuing this video series on being more of a thinker type and how to approach these situations in a different way. So the next video is going to be about sleep maintenance insomnia, which is really waking up in the middle of the night and not really be able to fall asleep in an easy way. We'll talk about that next time. But if you're struggling with both, then what I would suggest is you just take this piece, work on it first before you move on to the next part, because you're going to need time to put the right things in place in relation to different parts of sleep struggles. The more complex the situation, often the longer time it also takes to really put the tools and techniques and pieces that will help your mind to be retrained, because otherwise you're just throwing different things at it from that impatience kind of place. So thank you so much for watching. And if you decided to register for the live online class as well, I'm really looking forward to supporting you to sort of put the pieces together if you're really struggling to sort of make progress through these general videos as well.